I'm joined today by Rob Shapiro, Dean of the Social Studies Department at MacArthur High School, and former head coach and my former boss at Schreiner College, now Schreiner University in Kerrville, and one of my best friends in the world. And just to share with you guys a little bit of Rob's background. So he coached basketball for a long time, and during one of those years, there was a kid who was falsely accused of a crime, who was black and whose home life was sort of imperfect. And Rob went on to hire attorneys and eventually adopted this young man when he was 14 or 15 years old. And so Rob has a different background than the average white person we've spoken with, and has a lot more and a lot deeper relationships with black people than the average white person would. So I hope everybody listens to what he has to say. So my first question, Rob, is your circle of closest black friends and family, roughly what percent of them have experienced either unconstitutional nonviolent police harassment or unconstitutional non-lethal police brutality?
That's a pretty large majority. I'd probably say above 60, 70%, because they've all talked about it. Just, I've experienced it with LD, so I've seen that 2 or 3 times. I've experienced it with a couple players. I experienced it with my middle son, CJ, and bringing home his friends into Terrell Hills, from junior college. So, yeah, I've seen quite a bit of it. I'd say they're probably 70%.
Yeah, but I should have mentioned as well, Rob also is a former assistant coach at an HBCU, Houston Tillotson College, in Austin. And so, Rob, the project's called the Not Isolated Project, as you know, because way too many white people don't culturally connect the nonviolent harassment that's unconstitutional with the violence and the murder that can also occur. And so they tend to look only at that which they see, which is the teeny tip of a massive iceberg. And white people like to convince themselves that these issues are isolated so that we can brush them to the side and remain indifferent. Do you think these issues are isolated, as many white people insist, or do you think they're more systemic?
It's systemic for sure. It's isolated because you've never seen it. For you, if you've never experienced it, you can't speak to it. I grew up in a military family, so large majority of my friends growing up were, minorities. My dad was enlisted, just the people I hung out with, but the people that never have an experience of riding in a car and being pulled over, or going into a grocery store and, somebody or ask you, can I help you, specifically targeting you? If they've never been in that situation, then, they can't speak to it. So they see it as isolated. It doesn't happen to me, therefore, it can't be that true. I think that's probably what a lot of white people think, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, you said it really well. And it's important for people to understand just across the board, just because something is experientially isolated in your own life doesn't mean it's actually isolated. I've never seen a tiger in the wild. It doesn't mean there's no such thing as tigers in the wild. And so I think that's a really important point to raise. And then I'm curious what else is on your mind, because I know that you've been, knowing you and your heart, you were probably in this fight even before you adopted a black son. And probably the fact that you're in this fight is part of what caused you to take that action. So I know you've been at this for a long time. I'm curious what else is on your mind.
Well, let's start with, I don't understand racism. I don't get it. I think it's perfectly fine to hate people for valid reasons, like they're a jerk or they don't bring tacos to meetings when they're late, whatever it may be, but not because of the color of their skin. I know there are countless people that probably dislike me, but I'd be willing to bet none of them are because of the color of my skin. It's because something I did. And the ignorance for that, and I always start my school year off, is I talk about the Haile Selassie speech, where it turns, it's the song War by Bob Marley. Color of a man's skin is no more significant than the color of his eyes. And I talk to the kids about that, what does that mean to them? And then I bring in the study or the activity that the woman did, and I can't think of her name, with blue eyes and brown eyed kids. And I explain that. And so I start the year very anti-racist, like saying, we're not going to have a racist problem in this room. And so, I think that's the first thing that we should look at, is that it's a learned experience. It's not something that you're born with.
So you're saying that because it's a learned experience, whether it's, and we talked about this before, and I wrote about it in the book, a lot of times learning racism isn't even an intentional or active or conscious process. We absorb so many images over the course of our lifetime, and there's so many subtle subconscious ways. Sometimes in the movies, Rob, when like the lead character has the aha moment, like Usual Suspects, where Chad and Terry, and like 1,000 images flash in their head, and like, oh my God. I probably told you this story before, but I'm not sure I've told the story on these interviews. So I'll tell the abbreviated version. We had about 500 New Orleanians living in our gym at Georgia Tech. And the majority of them were black. And there was one woman, out of the entire thing, the entire group of, again, a large sample size, who was behaving inappropriately. She was being rude to people who had not, were there participating in food drives and clothing drives. And she was being rude. She was not a nice person. And, we tried to sort of redirect her, and, it just, it didn't go very well. Well, I go home that night and I turn on the news and take a wild guess who the one person was that they interviewed.
Oh, yeah.
Literally the only person who was behaving inappropriately. And by the way, she'd been traumatized. And based on how she was acting, not just in the hurricane, she'd probably been traumatized repeatedly throughout her life. As coaches, and teachers sometimes, we focus too often on the symptom, the so-called bad behavior, rather than the cause, which oftentimes is trauma.
Can I stop you there? Like, one of the things I talk to every student teacher, regardless if they're under me or somebody in our department, that I sit down and tell them, long before you criticize or you discipline a kid, know where that kid's coming from. Understand their home situation and know who that kid is before you jump on them. So yeah, it's true. You have to learn who they are, because you don't know what's going on in their home life.
No, or what happened in childhood, or the situation. The grandmother might have cancer and they're particularly close. You just don't know. And it took me a while to learn that as a coach. I used to, a kid was late, just kind of beat on him, metaphorically. I wasn't, but then,
at least that's your public statement.
But there may be, a variety of reasons. Like Jim Vasauskas. Jim, right?
Yeah.
He told me the story when I was a young coach, that he had a rule that if you missed practice, you didn't play. They practiced in the morning. Well, this kid was missing some practices because his dad broke his back and they were on a one-family farm. And if the kid wasn't doing that farm work, they weren't going to eat or be able to pay their bills. And Jim Vasauskas felt like an absolute jackass for not letting that kid play, because he prioritized his rule of no practice and play without, like you said, getting to know the kid. Well, that was an eye-opening moment, as was that situation in Atlanta, where it's like I saw that they only interviewed her, and it was like, just all these images flash back. And so, the process of becoming a racist or racially biased sometimes is an unintentional subconscious process, but it affects us all, and it falls upon us to try to self-educate to lessen those often reflexive or subconscious thoughts and feelings.
Well, you have all those things, and like it's in the media. You mentioned that. How do you display a photograph of a black person in a news interview? They got it up here in the corner. It used to be that he would typically be angry, that kind of thing, and that, you don't realize that you're seeing it. There's a video I watch with my students where we talk about stop and frisk. We're just talking about Fourth Amendment rights, things like that. And they're interviewing the two of these young men that had been stopped in New York and frisked. And then they go on to say, well, Bobby, he's now married with 2 kids and has a college degree. And so I paused it at that point and I asked the kids, I said, how is that racist? How is that statement that the I don't know what you call it, but the voiceover, it has to tell us that. What difference does that make? He's just an individual. Now we have to show that, he's a reputable member of society. We don't need to show that, in my opinion. Just let's move on. He was unlawfully stopped and frisked. They violated his rights. But we do that in the media, and it's easy to kind of, it becomes part of who you are, and you don't realize it. But it's something that I start looking at.
I want to unpack that because I think that the majority of the white people watching, if anyone does watch, they're not going to so what Rob was trying to say is that one, the media, by saying, and now he's married with a job and a college degree, one, they're saying, well, he turned out okay, so maybe the stop and frisk wasn't that big of a deal. And that might not be what the media meant. And the second thing they're saying is they're attaching qualifiers like, we were expecting him to not be married and not have a college degree. So we're going to mention it because we found these 2 facts about this person to be surprising. And it's important to understand that the reason that voiceover person or the person who wrote the particular piece you were watching, the reason they were surprised is because they racistly had lower or different expectations for black people based on being black. And so I wanted to just go back and touch on that a little bit more because I'm guessing that every time you show that, you get some blank stares from your students. Like, huh?
Well, every time.
But that's a compliment. He's got a college degree. Like, how can the compliment be racist? Like that kind of thing.
But then the light comes on. They're like, yeah, what does that matter? Why do we need to qualify that? And let them start to, and hopefully you get a discussion going in a classroom environment, right? Where you can, like, does that matter? Yes, it does. Well, why? And get them to go back and forth. And at the end, almost all of them go, yeah, that was racist. And I said,
what's the approximate racial breakdown of MAC?
We are America. Actually, we're San Antonio pretty much. It's like 40 or 50% white, majority Hispanic, 10% African American, and a few other. We're almost demographically San Antonio.
So how do you handle it because this has to happen, because I know that you're the type of teacher that actually wants real dialogue. You're not just trying to lecture. You're trying to, the old phrase of, I don't want teachers telling my kids what to think. I want, teaching them how to think.
Critical thinking skills.
I think really it's more like, I just want them to know it's okay to think.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal in your
environment. Use some deductive reasoning here.
And when you create an environment where kids are encouraged to say what's on their mind, and then you can break it down, how do you handle it when a white high school kid says something that's racist? Like, you bring racism and he says, well, coach, what about black on black crime? Or like, how do you handle that? And how does the classroom overall handle that? I'm really curious to know.
We've been actually, and we do a few things throughout the year. You can assume that's not the only thing that I'm going to do that's racism. We talk a lot about historically colonialism and how it's pervasive and affected us today. And I get great conversations. And I've had kids get mad at each other, and I tell them it's okay. you're safe in here. This is where it's going to stay. I've had one student mention the black on black crime. And I said, is there no such thing as white on white crime, Hispanic on Hispanic crime? Yeah, but well, then why should we pay attention black on black crime? Crime is crime. We are putting things into racial terms and segregating ourselves when we don't have to. If we were an all white society, if you go to an all white city that's 95% white, what percentage of crime is going to be white on white crime, do y'all think? And, you know, it's statistically probably going to be a little bit higher. And so they're, you know, those are things that I talk to them about, that we talk about media and influence a lot because, and especially in today's society, because we get so much false information. How do you research what's the right thing? So when you talk on black crime, hopefully I get a kid, and I didn't in this particular case, but hopefully I get a kid that'll talk back and say something, and then I'll say, stop. So somebody get out their phone, Google that for me real quick, just see what that is. And then we can continue the conversation from there. You know, whenever we get the appropriate stat. And then and if I don't get it, I tell them, look, man, this is on me, class is ending or whatever. Let me sit down and research it tonight, and we'll start again tomorrow.
Yeah, well, on that topic in particular, you know, one, you're completely right. We never talk about Latino on Latino crime, Asian on Asian crime, white on white crime. It's only black on black crime, which is absolutely racist to only talk about intra-racial crime about only one racial group is without a doubt in and of itself racist. And on top of that, I pay careful attention to the context, right? The only hear white people reference black on black crime when there is a national dialogue about police on
brutality. Yes.
And so it's always a deflective or distractive thing. And here's the analogy I've been using lately to try to get people to understand. If a German Jew kills a German Jew, it's not going to be a national or international story.
Right.
But if a German neo-Nazi kills a German Jew, that's going to be a national, international story. And that's not a double standard. It's context-based common sense. When you have a history in place, and we're going through this right now with Deshaun Jackson. Did you see his?
No, I didn't. I saw a headline, but I haven't read it yet today.
Well, apparently the quotes he was using aren't even from Hitler. So he's like not only being anti-Semitic, but also being like with like a side of ignorance. It's like anti-Semitic's ignorant. It's like ignorance with a side of ignorance, basically. But
yeah, that helps.
But lots of people who are looking to, who are desperate to turn the page and be like, can we please get, you know, American racism against black? Can we please talk about anything else? A lot of them are saying, well, why is this not a bigger story? Can you imagine if, you know, a Jewish athlete, you know, said something about a black person that would be the, you know.
Right.
And what I tried to, the analogy is that, let's say Germany's in a historic undertaking of really reconciling their past discrimination against Jewish people. And it's a multi-month movement, a groundswell of support that's unprecedented. And a random footballer in the Bundesliga makes a racist comment toward black people. Should the media in Germany give equal attention to a historical movement to try to finally face Germany's multi-century oppression of Jewish people? Should they pay equal attention to a random isolated comment from a German footballer who had never directly participated in enslaving black people? Well, you know, of course not. That would be absurd. And like, when have American black people collectively oppressed American Jews in this nation, right? And so it just, again, people want to find a reason to move. It's like, oh, it's a double standard. It's not. And it's not to defend Deshaun Jackson. I mean, again, it was a double dose of ignorance. First, he was anti-Semitic, and then he was historically inaccurate. And so I'm not in any way, shape, or form defending him. I'm just pointing out that the demands for the American media to cover Deshaun Jackson's one comment with equal vigor during this time when there's a historical groundswell of opposition to one of our two major, national ongoing sins. I found it to be an absurd request, and again, just distracted and deflected.
Well, the best way I can go with that is it kills me. Like, I watch Fox News because, I want to know. I want to know what the other side's saying,
right.
And it fascinates me to no end that places like them and One America News find 2 or 3 black guys, and I can't think of the girl's name right now that everybody is up against.
Candace Owens.
Say again?
Candace Owens.
Yes, thank you. And they bring them on as it represent an entire race. They're like, okay, well, yesterday on Fox News, my favorite racist Tucker Carlson had Jason Whitlock on and had Marcellus Wiley, who didn't agree with Black Lives Matter platform, a particular point within the platform. And literally, I can't tell you how much it was like, see, even this guy, he's an expert. Well, is he an expert, really? He's a good football player. I think he went to an Ivy League school. Oh, yeah, I get it. He's an expert at being black. So therefore, everybody else should be paying attention to him.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
one of the oldest, that's white people love to, Chris Rock said there are black people and they're N-words, right?
Yeah.
And white racists are like, you see, Chris Rock said it. And it's like, okay, well, one, he's a comedian and comedians tell jokes. And 2, the black people I know who are against, who don't think black people should use the N-word, they're not saying they think white people should.
Yeah. No.
It's like, but it's very comforting to an overt white racist to hear a black person say something that they agree with on the topic of race. And so they will cling to that and essentially say, well, how can I be a racist if this
black guy thinks the way I do?
I think, right. And I don't know if this makes it better or worse, but a whole lot of the black people who speak that way don't believe what they're saying. They just know that racist white people will buy their books and pay them to show up at speaking engagements and things of that like. So,
capitalism at its finest.
Yeah. So it's did you hear about Larry Elder's Uncle Tom documentary?
No, I have not.
Well, he's essentially saying that having a conservative opinion, you're ostracized and you're going to be labeled it's like, no, Larry, it's that you shit on black people on purpose all the time. It's not that you're allowed to say that you want a small government with lower taxes. And the Second Amendment. Nobody's being called an Uncle Tom for conservative political principles. It's that you go out of your way to shit on black people. So does Candace Owens.
Yeah, I watched I watched a debate between her and T.I. And then I watched another thing where Killer Mike was, they were just.
Well, that was actually on the same stage.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, I watched in 2 different clips, I should have said.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I was just amazed by, listening to this woman that she had these views, because it's so counterintuitive.
I don't think she does.
But
you realize she tried to be a political pundit as a liberal and failed miserably.
And so she's trying to reinvent herself.
This great awakening. Katrina Pearson, on the other hand, I think she honestly feels the way that she feels. And she disparages black people as well. And, but I think that she means it. I think Candace Owens is just selling books. I think Larry Elder is mostly just selling books.
You can have your opinion about people. If you want to sell books, that's your business. But the idea is that, I understand having unity, but I talk bad about white people. We have white trash, and that to me is not indicative of race, that's just, those people are just somebody I wouldn't deal with. And so, you end up in these, I hate the fact that we parse everything and have to attach a label to it. It drives me insane. And, you think about it, it's like, and you go back to where you said, white people say the N word. I don't know. Do you remember Travis trying to convince me that I could say the N word with an A? And this was long.
I don't remember that.
This was long before, that conversation, the hard ER and the A was really part of anything. This is what, 2000 and whatever, early 2000s. And Travis was trying to convince me, and I was like,
that was like 97.
Yeah, I'm like, dude, I'm not going to get out of the car in the third ward and even attempt anything. And he's like, why not? You can do it, coach. No, I can't.
And more than that, you didn't want to.
No.
Like that was the Tanasi coach. I always worry I fuck up his first name. But that was kind of his point was, I don't get to use the word bitch the way my wife does, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't get to use the word faggot like Dan Savage does, but I don't want to. Like, the real question is why?
Those are very good points.
Yeah. He's the. I've actually been asking for input on, like, I think he's terrific. I think Michael Harriot's terrific. I think Talbot Swan's terrific. But like, if you were to ask me, like, who were the most important, powerful black voices on the topic of justice in America for black people, unfortunately, I retreat to James Baldwin, Paul Robeson, Malcolm X.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the problems with that is, and this may be an interesting project for you to take on as well, because you're talking to kids. One of the problems is that when you show, like, you and I, because we have very diverse circles of friends, and in your case, family, we can read a Malcolm X speech or hear a Malcolm X lecture and recognize the things he's talking about are every bit as prevalent and relevant today as they were then. But a lot of white people are like, yeah, it sucked in the 60s, we get it. But it can't hit home because their standard operating assumption is that, this shit doesn't happen anymore. This shit is isolated. And so I've been seeking, like, do you follow Michael Harriot on Twitter?
No.
He's absolutely unbelievable.
I will.
The historical threads that he points out, it's like I'm deep enough in this fight that I don't get defensive when I'm learning new things from black people the way I used to. I just love learning new things, especially on this topic. And he, there was I knew about the Deacons for Defense.
I know this.
But I never knew about, and I'm blanking on a guy named Robert, I want to say Smith, out of Monroe, North Carolina, started a National Rifle Association group that was designed particularly for armed self-defense of black people, which, of course, was righteous then and now. It sucks, a little off topic, but it sucks that we have, and I get that Huey B. Newton was not, in his private life, the world's most morally upstanding human. But it sucks that we've demonized the Black Panthers as a movement, because all they were doing is saying, if you guys brutalize and murder us, we're going to fight back. As I believe everyone has not only a constitutional right, but just a human right.
That you want to change gun laws. I can't think of the comedian. He said, start letting black people have guns. Let them be more vocal about it.
So I don't know if you saw I want to say, I literally just learned of this group today, but I want to say it's the NFAC.
They had a protest, or they had a little march.
I think it's called the Not Fucking Around Coalition. Okay. And it looked to be several hundred of well-armed, the founder of the group, whose name I cannot recall, said that they're all ex-military, right? And so, of course, a lot of white people look at that group and immediately become afraid, and immediately oh, that's a terrorist group. They're advocating violence, just like we did to the Black Panthers. Even though the Proud Boys get to show up with their rifles to BLM rallies to intimidate
and take them into the capitals of our state governments,
capitals of state governments, and yet somehow that is seen as okay. But anyway, Michael Harriot taught me about Robert Smith. I think his last name is Smith. I'll correct it in the comments on the video if I'm wrong. But yeah, he's the he lays out just basic, important, but somewhat obscure historical truths in threads. Like he did a thread on how we're always like, well, we respect your right to protest, but we just don't like the methods. You should be peaceful, like Dr. King.
Yeah, that shit worked for Colin Kaepernick really well.
Right, and it worked well for Dr. King as well, getting a bullet in his head.
Yeah.
But Harriet goes down. I mean, your point first, touch on that real quickly. Yeah, you're damn right. We don't listen. We don't listen. If we're on a corner together and you flick my ear and I keep saying, stop it, 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 stop it. Maybe after 400 years, I might punch you in the head. And that would be your fault, not my fault. But Harriet points out that we only focus on, like, white people went nuts when at one Black Lives Matter rally in particular in New York, early on, pretty immediately after Eric Garner was murdered, there was a pretty major traffic disruption. And white people were so mad. Not all white people, of course, but lots of white people were so mad. And it's like Harriet pointed out, like, Martin Luther King Jr. was much more disruptive than that, constantly, on purpose.
Yes.
Disruption via direct action was what he was about. And yeah, he advocated for nonviolence as well, but white people make it seem like nonviolence only. No, it was direct action and disruption, but let's try to do it nonviolently to the extent that we're able. And so white people really have gotten that whole, truth. And I already knew that, but the incidents that Harriet was bringing up, it was in that thread he taught me about. Again, I heard the Deacons of Defense, but not the NRA group out of Monroe. Anyway, you'd love them. Like, you would really, really, really be fascinated.
I'll look at it because we don't hear enough, and I talk about it in my history classes constantly. Women, like, I'm like, all right, ladies, pay attention, because this is where y'all are coming finally into the picture again. Or we talk about, if you look at U.S. or you take world history in the state of Texas, I'm trying to think just off the top of my head. Not too many. I don't know any teaks that are going to be directly Black centered off the top of my head. There's Mansa Musa, the king from Ghana, and some various African tribes. But then U.S. history is going to be more Afro-American centric at some points, but not nearly enough. Like, I think it's really kind of unique that, like, I talked to one of my teachers last year about the Tulsa riots, and I was like, hey, do y'all teach that? He's like, no. I said, why not? And he goes, don't know, haven't heard of it. So they sat down and, looked at it, and we were going to incorporate it this year. And now it's become a big thing, that's awesome. People are beginning to see that. And when you talk about, the flicking of the ear, people don't see that 400 years of being flicked in the ear. But they also don't see the last, let's just take from 1965 till now. And you look at things that are like flicking of the ear governmentally, the stripping of the voting rights that the Supreme Court took away. Or let's go to, gerrymandering to make sure that you get certain people to vote in certain areas. All these things we don't deal with as white people. They deal with them as minorities. And I like that flick in the ear, because sooner or later I'd probably punch somebody. I don't like being contained in one area, and that happens to them a lot. In terms of like, you know what? I've been thinking about this, and I'm going to jump, and you'll catch it. Do you remember when we went to recruit Kamal McQueen?
Yes.
And we drove around New York for like hours, lost?
That's because the motherfuckers who made the Queen's map, like,
right.
Who thought that's how streets should be designed?
Do you remember what we did prior to getting out of that car?
The main thing I remember, I don't want to step on your story, so you tell the story.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, the main thing I remember is that, and it speaks to that segregation is a national problem, not just a Southern problem. It also speaks to how terrified, like white people point to black on black crime. Well, then why are you afraid to go into a black neighborhood? Right? Like, you're afraid to go into a black neighborhood, even though you're saying it's black on black crime. Well, what are you so afraid of? And I remember that we got out of the car and we were walking up, and there were a couple of older black guys on the stoop. And the first thing they said was, "What school do y'all coach for, and who are you here to see?"
Yeah.
Like, it was so infrequent that housing project got white visitors that they knew immediately that we must be coaches. And I thought that stuck with me forever. I've literally told that story as recently as like within the last 30 days, just in terms of like, this is how, Malcolm X said all the time, he said, New York's more segregated than Mississippi. This is a damn Southern problem. This is something that we need to face on a much more national level than that. But that's the main thing I remember. I don't remember what we did immediately before that. Ate at White Castle?
No, we actually, I took off my watch, left it locked in your glove box. And so since all this has happened, I actually went back and thought about that. And I was like, was I racist in doing that? Or was I just like, oh shit, this is a poor neighborhood. I have a nice watch.
Quite possibly both.
And so, I see those things. I look at those weird moments in my life. And I do remember the guys asking us, we all here to see Jamal McQueen. Oh, yeah, he can play a little bit. Thank you. That's why we're here.
Oh, no, and they knew what apartment he was in, what tower.
Yeah, it helped us out.
No, I did not remember that you were like took off your watch. And I agree with you that there's probably, almost certainly, racism or racial bias in that. And I've talked about this before. Like, I've repeatedly admitted on these videos, I consider myself to be a racist. And I think that having that, like of course, right now, we're sort of living in a bit of a cancel culture. And so it can feel risky for white people to be vulnerable. But I think it's critical. Like, in all my conversations over the years with white people who say racially objectionable, racist shit, when I start off by saying I consider myself to be a racist, like, showing that level of vulnerability drops their defensiveness measurably, and greatly increases the likelihood that my message is going to register, And so I truly, honestly believe that if there's a white person in America who's literally a 0 on the 1 to 10 racist scale, I never met him, and we hear like lately, I've heard in the last year more times than I've heard in the previous 25 years talking about this, that, I have a biracial grandchild or a biracial. And I don't believe we're having that many biracial children that quickly. I believe that some person with a biracial grandkid who's accused of being a racist said, I have a biracial grandkid, and that shut the accusation
down. Argument down.
And so like so many people on the right are claiming they have breathing problems and their ADA rights are being violated. It's like, no, you saw that work for someone else and you co-opted it, but at that point, I don't recall feeling fearful of being robbed, but I'm sure that was probably my first time ever, because we don't have high-rise.
Yeah, I had never.
And I probably was apprehensive based on racism too, and again, I don't recall feeling that way, but I would probably be more surprised if I didn't feel that way than if
Like I don't remember being afraid. Like,
well, you were
I
afraid of
didn't.
the watch being stolen.
Right. I felt no physical fear, but I was like, I'm kind of poor, and that is a nice watch. Let's not tempt anybody.
Yeah,
And
probably if the well, okay, put it this way. If we were in a rural area, recruiting a kid, would you have taken your watch off going into a trailer park?
oh, no,
Probably not. So I think these
like
things,
Debo's house, I wouldn't take it.
right? And I think these things are, I think these are really important things to talk about because, we can't ever fix a damn thing if we're not admitting it, looking introspectively, having these conversations, challenging ourselves. And, you're probably in the same boat that I am, that I'm learning a lot from the Michael Harrods of the world and the Tanasi Coates of the world. I'm not feeling defensive or agitated by what they're saying. I didn't feel hot and bothered by Coates's article explaining why reparations are not only righteous but necessary, and connecting it to, it wasn't just that you screwed us during slavery, you kept screwing us, right? The notion that slavery is a long time ago, I never enslaved anybody. Well, the black people hell, I'll give you a stat you may or may not know. In 2011, Bank of America was fined $335 million because they were still rampantly discriminating against equally qualified black borrowers. And in 2007, the Mississippi State Supreme Court ordered a review to find out whether or not juries were still being whitewashed when there was a black defendant, especially with a white victim. And they found still in 2007, it was happening rampantly. And people need to understand, which is like, I was surprised when I heard this, horrified. You know what year it was the Supreme Court ruled whitewashing of juries to be unconstitutional?
No, I don't. I'm going to say in the 90s, though, it feels like.
Fucking 86. So people are like, oh, that happened a long time ago. Well, 86 is not a long time ago. And 2007 and 2011, damn sure aren't a long time ago. So it's like we still have we always talk about progress, right? Look at all the white people always like progress. Look at all the progress we've made. It's like, hey, my two things there are fine. Let's recognize the progress as long as it's a mobile celebration that clearly recognizes the distance we have left to go. And I think the best analogy to show how little progress we've made, or how we haven't made as much progress as we give ourselves credit for, is comparing John Carlos and Tommy Smith to Colin Kaepernick. It was the same shit. They raised the glove fist in '68. They were banned from their sport. Kaepernick was,
They faced far more public ridicule.
The difference is that when Kaepernick did it, by that point, the country was in sort of a 50-50 split. Whereas when John Carlos and Tommy Smith did it,
it was not. It was very majority.
5-5. But if fully half of American white people, and quite possibly more, were upset with Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, let's focus on that rather than the fact that the white people who are attempting to be better is a higher percentage than it used to be.
Yeah.
Still, if not a clear majority, a full half of white people who are so overtly racist that that they think a song and a piece of cloth are more important than black people's human rights.
That kills me. That the fact that nobody understood him, what he was doing, the fact that they ignored the fact that he sat first and then Nate Boyer asked him to kneel. You know that story, right?
Yes.
And the fact that I know that got media attention, but it never got traction because, people just kept harping on the fact that it was against your soldiers, against all this. And the reason I'm taking Kaepernick in that particular point is because I never cared about the rebel flag. Like, I grew up in the South. I grew up, grandmother's from Mississippi, mom's from Pascagoula, Mississippi, rest of the family's from deep East Texas. You know, I grew up around it, saw it all the time. It wasn't until LD was stationed in South Carolina, and my daughter-in-law worked for the state of South Carolina as a comptroller, that I realized that the state flag was prevalent there. The Confederate battle flag, was flown with the state flag. And LD passed it constantly. And I never thought of it. So this is like maybe 2010, maybe not, maybe 2008. And that's when I was like, oh my God, they're letting this thing happen. The flag's flying. My son, who's got combat tours for this country and has put his life on the line, has to walk by that every day. And if they had won, we would never have had a connection. He wouldn't have been in the military. None of his life would have happened. And it was like, I don't want to say a light came on, but it was just like, it stunned me that I was so ambivalent to the fact that he was in that situation until it was a photograph that jogged it. There was they were at the state capitol, and you could see the South Carolina flag and the Confederate battle flag flying at the same time. And I was just like, well, what the fuck? You know, he's good enough to put his life on the line, but you're going to fly that? She's good enough to handle your money?
No, I had so my epiphany happened to come earlier. But of course, I grew up in Texas, and that was a good 25% of my childhood friends had the Confederate battle flag in their room on the wall. Maybe not that high, but high. It was not one or two.
Football teams had them on their shoulder pads.
Right. And, but I went to Lamar High School, which was roughly 1/3 white, 1/3 black, 1/3 Latino. Latinx. Well, this group of like 15 white boys all wore Confederate flag t-shirts to school on the same day with the Hank Williams Jr. quote, if the South would have won, we would have had it made. Okay. Well, seeing my black friends' reaction to that, I had that epiphany. But like in the 8th grade, if I saw a Confederate flag bumper sticker, I didn't think twice.
Probably sing Dixie and keep moving.
Well, I absolutely grew up singing Dixie. Now, I had an epiphany on that even earlier. I was at Camp Stewart in like 87. And I only went to that camp one year, but the counselors led the cafeteria in a rendition of Dixie. Okay. And at the end of the song, the entire cafeteria who'd been going to the camp, I gather, for years, my first year there, broke out in a chant of 1, 2, 3, Robert E. Lee, 3, 2, 1, the South should have won. And there was one black kid there, a kid named Matthew Hines, who I've long ago lost touch with. And I remember looking at him, and it was like, that was also an altering moment where it was like, I never thought about what the song Dixie meant. It was just a tune.
Was your friend just standing there like the guy in the Hitler photo where everybody else is just?
Yeah. Well, I can't say he was my friend. He was a couple cabins older, but I remember him. I remember him in that moment, really, is the only thing I really remember about him. It was a long time ago, and I was not a summer camp enjoyer in general. But I remember that was like it never dawned on me that like the words of the song, they're talking about fighting and dying for Dixie. They're talking about fighting and dying to uphold slavery. And the 1, 2, 3, Robert Lee, 3, 2, 1, the South should have won. That was a holy shit moment to me at 10 years old, where I was like, oh my God, this whole thing was about so on the Dixie song, I turned against that song when I was 10. But if they had to done that chant after, I was singing along until they did the chant.
So they did the chant.
And then they did the chant, and I was like, ooh. And Confederate flag, I wouldn't have had that epiphany until, without seeing the hurt and righteous anger of my black friends at Lamar when those white kids showed up wearing those T-shirts. And so, I had the, and I think that, like, the conversations like this, they're they can be helpful. And it's like, to me, it's not like, I'm not like proud of singing Dixie at 10. I do think that it's good that I thought about it and learned better and grew, and I think that we're all growing. And that's kind of my thing when I talk to white people about this. I said, look, I started off as like a 6.5, maybe a 7. I told jokes about black people freely as an elementary school kid. I kind of stopped doing that when I fell in love with basketball. Like, as soon as you start to know some black people, you start to kind of be like, oh man, that's fucked up. I shouldn't be laughing at that shit. I shouldn't, but it was a slow transition. I mean, it was not like I'm not anticipating a deeply brainwashed white racist who's a 7 to get to where I am in 3 days, but I think it's important to strive for progress. I think it's important to recognize there's progress left to be made. Like you just
without a doubt,
self-reflecting about that time in Queens, well, would we have been a little more uptight in a poor white community? Would we have left our watches I didn't wear a watch, but literally my main takeaway from that situation was that, and we had the same thing in Smiley.
Yeah.
At Smiley, and there was a group of kids out front of the school, and one of them pointed and said, white people.
Yeah.
No animals. Just more like, we've read about them. Look, it's actual white people. And Smiley's like 7 miles from where I grew up. And like the segregation that we're, still living with is, it's the, Abraham Lincoln believed that black people and white people would never, ever, 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 ever be able to live together. And unfortunately, in 150 plus years, if you look at the math, like 25% of neighborhoods are reasonably integrated. So it's like, he's been like 75% right still, 150 years later. So I don't know.
I do like the progress. I think Black Lives Matter protests that have occurred since George Floyd was murdered. It's buoyed my heart to see the fact that there are lots of different races involved. We marched in the first one here in San Antonio, and I'm old. I'm not going to do 2 or 3 because I'm old and fat, and I don't mind doing one. But we walked, and it was such a good feeling to be around all of the people that were there supporting it. With Eric Garner, we didn't see it, the mix, and I'm a little bit hopeful that we can, because you said something about, we want to hurry up and turn the page. No, we don't, because I think this is our best opportunity to make a difference, because I think these kids are much more accepting. And I see it in school because I have kids that are trans kids in our school, homosexual kids, and they're open. If that would have never occurred in my high school. And, I think that we're starting to see this more being inclusive, and people are starting to see the injustice. And one of the reasons I think that we're seeing this, and I'll see if you agree, I was thoroughly heartbroken over Tamir Rice. That broke me to see that child be shot and killed. But, and then you go to Philando Castile, which was the second to me, just absolutely gutted me because the officer had so little disregard for the life of the people in the car. We talk about Philando Castile a lot. There's a child in the car in the back seat, and you're firing rounds at point blank range. The fact that that child made it out of there and is alive is a miracle. And you see those two things, right? There's this little bit of doubt that's there because what does the officer always say? I feared for my life. I thought he was going for a gun. It's typically, and we're paraphrasing, but it's in that realm typically, right? You and I don't know that, what it's like to be in that situation because I've never been put in that situation. And so we've always given it a pass. Now, with George Floyd, there is no fear for his life. It was not a split-second decision. It was an 8-minute and 46-second decision. And so now people see that, and take this the right way. It took that man's death to galvanize, to me, white people starting to look at racial injustices, because that's an undeniable thing. Having that man blankly stare at that kid with the young kid that was filming it, she was 17 only, and the total disregard he had for the other two officers that apparently were like, hey, should we roll him over? And he was like, no. We got to see that. And there was no break in the timeline. You know, if you look at the whole Philando Castile thing, nobody's watched that whole 20-minute thing. You know, they only see the one where he's, oh, don't reach. But still, there's that momentary doubt. The officer said, I was afraid he was going for a gun. You know where I'm going with that? And now white people cannot have that as an excuse. As I feared for my life, you know, that's not on the table. You can't make that argument.
Well, you're right that the look of utter callous evil on the part of the white police lyncher in Minneapolis was a key factor in a lot of white people sort of finally, because Eric Garner, I mean, those situations are so similar, you know, like and Eric Garner's case was in some ways worse because they knew him. They were doing an unconstitutional code red. They'd arrest him a bunch of times for a petty crime, and they was like, well, he's not getting it. Let's teach him a lesson. And they code redded him, you know, and then they weren't even indicted. You know, in Minneapolis, that guy's going to go to prison the rest of his life. You know, so in some ways, and the other three police officers in Minneapolis who were also going to go to prison, and rightfully so, they were afraid of the senior cop who's clearly a violent, evil person.
So let me ask you a question. Do you believe that the two rookies should have to go to prison?
Yes.
Even though wasn't it only their third time?
Do you remember A Few Good Men?
Yeah. I know that's where you're drawing the code red from.
Where when Hal tells the younger private, he said, yeah, the court martial's right because
I remember that scene, yeah.
We were supposed to stick up. You know, like that's once you take an oath, if just because the cop's the one abusing the Constitution violently, where in the oath does it say you're not obligated to intervene?
So can I add to that?
So to be clear, Rob, I have empathy. Those three young cops were scared out of their minds.
No, the Asian cop I don't have much sympathy for him. He was a veteran and very much in tune to what was going on. The two young ones, I get it because I equated to, you know, I would have never talked back to Coach Meyer.
Right. No, I mean, to be very clear, I don't believe that I think that what they've been charged with is appropriate. Accessory to murder. They're gonna get 5 to 15 years and serve 3. And I absolutely have empathy for the position they were in. Here's this violent bully sociopath who's close friends with the union boss, right, and has real authority over your life. But you took an oath, and the oath wasn't to suck off your superior officer.
See, that's one of the things, though, I talk about, though, in human nature, we protect ourselves.
But there's so many instances where it's human nature, but you get sent to prison anyway because it wasn't right.
These things are
like a great example. Let's say we robbed a bank. Let's say you robbed a bank, and I knew about it. I lied to the cops to protect you. Well, I can have empathy for why I would do that. But I'm still going to fucking go to prison.
Yeah.
It was my human nature to want to protect you as a friend. It was their human nature to be afraid of the superior officer and not have the courage to stand up. I'm not disputing that there's human nature involved here. It's just at the end of the day, you made a choice that wasn't the right choice. And choices have consequences. If they'd even, and maybe this happened on the film, I didn't see. I kind of changed my mind on the Nick Sandman thing when I saw the full film, and when his classmates started dancing around and mocking the indigenous American, he did turn around and go, hey, knock that off. That's not that was when it was I can't say I'm on his side per se, with we know they bought the MAGA hats deliberately to provoke.
Right.
Again, human nature, high school boys together, that thing can happen. But I was not, because my thing at first was, well, okay, maybe he wasn't banging on the drums and woot-wooting, but he damn sure didn't tell the other motherfuckers to knock it off.
Yeah.
Well, fuck him. But then I saw he actually did. And I was like, okay, I can't say I'm still the biggest Nick Sandman fan in the whole wide world. But I can, he did what I feel was obligated for him to do in that setting, whereas those rookie cops did not.
So let me ask you another question on this in the same vein. Drew Brees' situation, where he tweeted out, I'll never be able to handle the fact that you disrespect the flag.
Okay, so I can speak to this on a very personal level. My grandfather was a Marine colonel, decorated.
Oh, I knew Pappy.
Fighter pilot. Oh, yeah, I know. Fighter pilot. This is for the if there's an audience.
Yeah.
I'm 9 years old, something like that, and I'm watching whatever Memorial Day something or other, and the anthem's playing, and I'm farting around like a 9-year-old might, and he knocked the fuck out of me in the middle of the next week, yoked me up, and explained to me in a very plain way that brave men and women have died to respect that fucking flag, and you're going to stand upright and pay attention. Well, that sticks with you when you're 9, and so when Cap took a knee, I had a reflexive involuntary 30-second reaction, not of anger, but of, oh, come on, man, not during the anthem, right? Well, 30 seconds later, I redirected and said, it's got nothing to do with the anthem. And the reaction is that the flag represents ideals that we haven't fucking lived up to. And the ideals need to be more important than a piece of cloth. And so 30 seconds later, I supported Colin Kaepernick fully and do to this day. And so my issue with Brees is that it's not like if he were a Westlake grad who went on the PGA and spoke that way, as long as he was willing to listen to re-education, I wouldn't feel like, oh, he should be canceled. He just didn't know any better. He said both his grandfathers fought in World War II. He might have got the shit beat out of him when he was 9 years old too for not honoring the flag, right? The issue is that, God, you play big-time D1 football, which means that over the course of 4 years, you had at least 130 or 40 black teammates. You've been on multiple NFL teams over the course of 20 years. How can you have the opportunity to build this many close relationships with black people and still not get it to that extent, right? And so I'm not saying I'm not really into the cancel culture thing generally, but yeah, I don't give Drew Brees a pass, and I thought that his comments were racist and insensitive. I thought his first 7 apologies were insincere bullshit, but I do think at this moment in time he's trying to redirect, which I think is a positive thing.
So my question is I look at that, and hearing your answer is good. Like, I looked at it and I was like, Jesus, why pick today to tweet out about that? This time period.
It was an interview. He was asked.
And is that what? Okay, so I missed that part of it.
It was not that bad.
But I know he's given millions of dollars to primarily poor African American neighborhoods to help rebuild them in New Orleans. And I want to say the figure is $5 million. And so I look at that and I think, actions versus words. And I've had some, where I think about, are we on this guy? And, in today's culture, everybody jumped on the internet, right? Instead of just, like, if it had happened in my world, I'd have picked up the phone and said, hey, man, what were you thinking?
No, people did pick up the phone.
But he didn't win out. Yeah, but what did we see?
So to redirect, you got to keep in mind, LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act. He was racist as fuck.
Oh, without a doubt.
So, and the Civil Rights Act was a lot more consequential than $5 million to some poor neighbors in New Orleans. So you can 100% do deliberately thoughtful things for black people and still be a racist. And
I believe you, and I agree.
So it's not, again, I'm not trying to cancel Drew Brees. I was very disappointed in him in particular, based on the fact he had the opportunity to develop an unlimited number, practically, of legitimately super close relationships with black people, but kept those relationships so superficial that he was never able to understand. Even it's like he was like, well, I see that I read an article that said that New Orleans public schools are shit, and it's mostly black kids. I'll write a check, and that's good. I'm certainly not saying don't write checks. It's just, it was really disappointing to me because I'd had the same experience, right?
Yeah.
Both my granddads served too. Now the other one, he was very old by the time I even came along. So I don't really, I remember him, but we certainly never had, talks or went to Memorial Day things together. But it's like I haven't had any more opportunity to get to know black people as true friends I genuinely love than he has. I've had no more opportunity to try to have more empathy and to try to understand. He's had the same opportunities I've had. And I graduated from Alamo Heights. He graduated from Westlake, rival schools, nearly all white, affluent areas. Both granddads served, where he technically is 2 years younger. I remember him beating the shit out of those poor football kids as a sophomore. It's not good to play a future NFL Hall of Famer who has a good coach as well. But we had we had very similar upbringings, and we had very similar opportunities to unlearn and grow. And yet,
see, I think that's interesting, though, that you say he only built superficial relationships, and I hadn't thought of that. Like, I wondered how he had gotten to that point too. Like, how did you not understand that this wasn't about the flag? You had to be, you weren't in a locker room. I've been in hundreds of locker rooms, and the conversations that go on with your teammates, you never got. I like the idea of the superficial. Yeah, he must not have. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, if you're around that many black people and you don't have what it says to me is that it was casual relationships.
Yeah.
Never entered the heart of black teammates or let black teammates enter his heart. And so, yeah, I was I had, and again, I don't think every Drew Brees jersey needs to be burned. I'm not into cancel culture as a general rule of thumb. But yeah, I did not have really even one fucking ounce of sympathy for him. Because
I admit I did, but I didn't think of it from that other point, not seeing it as a superficial relationship.
But you didn't have the same exact experience with a Marine father, like with the flag, you probably, when Cap first took a knee, you probably didn't have a 30-second reactive, why was so I was and you didn't go to an almost all-white affluent high school, right? And you didn't so it's my experience is aligned with his sort of uniquely well.
Right.
Where I felt much more harshly judgmental toward him than you might have. If that makes any sense.
But I took some notes, by the way, when we were talking. And you talked about, you just mentioned at one point, biracial children. Do you want to know how racist we are? 4 years ago, Cheerios caught, do you not remember, an immense amount of grief because they were doing just a simple Cheerios commercial of a kid that looked mostly white, a white mom, and then all of a sudden there was a black dad. And they caught tons of grief. And that's 4 years ago. And there's nothing more wholesome, conceivably, than a bowl of Cheerios. And
I don't even remember that, but I'm not surprised. I hear from white racists all the time, and bigots outside of the white race. Not talking about race, talking about whether it's gay or trans or women or whatever.
Right.
What I hear all the time is they're throwing it in our face and they're trying to cram it down our children's throats. It's nobody's trying to recruit your kid to marry a wife of the other race. Nobody's trying to recruit your kid to be gay or trans. What you'd have to have a very damaged brain to even think like that in the first place. It's not the agenda of black people is to be left the fuck alone by white racists to live their life with equal opportunity as they're guaranteed under our Constitution, our basic ideas. Gay people and trans people, they want to be left the fuck alone by homophobic bigots and trans bigots to live their life. Have equal protection, equal opportunity. That's the agenda. That's it. It's not but you hear that I don't mind if someone else marries, interracially, but I don't want my child to see that. What?
Yeah. How are we going to protect the children?
And I always say on this topic, particularly because lately it comes up more. I have not heard as many white people in the last decade fret terribly about all these interrelationships on TV are going to make their kid like black. I haven't heard that as much in the last decade as I did the previous, 15 years. But you hear it a ton, especially on trans. They're trying to, it's about the kids. And I'm like, well, if it's really about the kids, if that's your concern, take a look at the extraordinarily high suicide numbers amongst LGBT plus youth. And all of the things you're saying directly lead to those suicides. So you don't give a fuck about kids. Go fuck yourself. You're just being a bigot. You fucking know it. And knock it off.
I have a gay friend that told me, he said, I didn't choose to be gay. He's talking about it and he goes, I didn't choose to, have people mad at me constantly for my life choices or spit on me or be pissed off at me. And he goes, I don't like going to the proctologist either. He said, he gave me all these things and he said, you try to explain it to somebody and they don't get it. And he goes, it has nothing to do. He goes, it's not a choice. We're doing, it is who we are. And that's the problem, is we're not accepting them. And that's the other part that I'm going to give you about the biracial thing. How do we know we're racist with biracial relationships or biracial people? Every biracial person that how do they identify?
Black.
How does the government or the outside world see them?
We're black, especially the outside world.
So the history lesson for that is the charts that they gave in Nazi Germany divided you into 4 classes. Pure German, you had Mischling 1 and Mischling 2, that going back generationally to look at your grandparents to see who was Jewish, how much blood you had in you, blah, blah, blah. How racist are we still that, and you and I both have several friends that are biracial, they're black. We automatically assume they're black. Why not? Barack Obama was the first black president.
Yeah, well, and
he was half white.
You know the history of one drop.
Yeah.
American society said if you have one drop of black blood, you're black. And so it's like, well, if the entire structure of American society is going to view biracial children as black, it'd be a pretty lonely hill for that biracial kid to die on by insisting I'm half white and half black. And so it's like.
But it's an interesting thought, though, right? We see them only as black. That doesn't tell you how ingrained racism is in us.
Well, it does. It does. And and again, it's like I interviewed David Peavy, and he's biracial, and it's like he didn't say these exact words, and I don't want to speak for him. I kind of feel like that as long as the police see you as black, then and society treats you, it's like if your struggle can be a common struggle can be a unifying force, and it's like there can be an instant connection between 2 black strangers that a white person can't reproduce because of, it's like, yeah, that's happened to me too. It's like whether you're black in New York City or LA or Seattle or there is one common experience. And that one common experience is that you've been pretty consistently, not universally anymore, but you've been pretty consistently treated differently or like shit or with hostility or with suspicion, simply because you have darker skin.
Dave and I talked about that, and he's fairly light-skinned, and but I would, and think about these things is conversations between David Peavy and I. For we make fun of each other, black, white, I can't dance, whatever, and I very.
No, you can't. I've seen it. It's a trap.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you the thing that I asked David. And we had this conversation. I said, how do you identify? Why do you identify like that? That had to be like 1989 or 90 that we were having those conversations. And he and I we went through it. And then when we coached together, we were talking about it. And, I'm fairly certain that I didn't offend him. But, now I have to ask myself, and it's a good thing that I do. I ask myself, okay, well, should I say those things? But I asked David, who I love dearly, hey, does half of you want to get to work on time? And the other half is like, nah, fuck it. Very much a BPT kind of thing. And he was like, mostly I don't want to come. He said something, just right back. And we're both just laughing about it. But if somebody else had heard that didn't understand who we were, and that David knew I wasn't judging him, that filters back out. And then, God forbid, some bigot heard it, racist heard it, and it's like, oh yeah, that's all right to say shit like that. So that, being careful in public is becoming more and more prevalent, not just for the cancel culture. I don't want to bolster somebody else's ridiculous argument.
Well, so I'm glad you brought up that specific example, because when people will ask me BPT or CPT, because that's not something that most white people ever heard of in their life. It's an inside joke amongst black people that white people they trust, they'll bring in to that joke. right? It's not like the KKK doesn't know what BPT and CPT even mean. It's something black people will rib each other, right? And so I learned that coach in 02. Kid was late to practice. He said, "Oh, just CPT." I was like, "Well, what's CPT?" He said, "Color people time." All the black kids were laughing, and some people say BPT, black people time, right? And so people will say like like you always say you're racist, but I don't like that's ridiculous. I never see it. And I give me an example. Say, I'll give you a great example. Because I was let in on this joke, this inside joke, years ago. If I'm meeting a black person for lunch and they're late, I'm always chuckling to myself, CPT, BPT. Much the same way you were ribbing David based on being let in on that inside joke by some other black person some other time, or maybe even by David himself for all I know. But the fact that we were joking earnestly, right, and in my case, chuckling to myself, the fact that we're associating behavior with race is racist.
Yeah.
It's important to say that. And whether joking or not, and Lord knows, and David definitely knows that you have no evil intentions toward him. You're not going to burn a cross in his lawn tomorrow, and that's back to what I talked about a lot in these interviews, the scale, and it's important for even most of my black friends who either went to a majority white school and so didn't have a hood inflection, if you will be told like, oh, you're one of the good ones, like all that type of stuff.
Or you speak so well.
And all of that just racist garbage. And, I've had black friends, and you probably have as well, reverse that jokingly and say, you're one of the good ones.
Yeah.
Not like but even us who are good ones, we still have room to grow. On the topic of battling our inner racist and battling racial bias and continuing to speak to other white people about these issues. So it's like I'm glad to have you in the fight. You're in it. I'm almost positive before I was, because you're an old fuck. And you're not young and beautiful like I am. I just want the record to reflect. But, man, I appreciate your thoughts. And
well, before we go, remember, don't forget that idea that we talked about at the beginning. If you ever want to explore it more, that slavery didn't exist in terms of a single race until we got to transatlantic slave trade. And race is not an issue in the world until this time. You were never considered a race in terms of black, white, Hispanic. You're from Africa, you're African, you're from Italy, you're an Italian or Roman, whatever it may have been. This is the first time in history that we've purposely sought out and went after a single group of people for a specific purpose of slavery. And it was backed up by the church, and that's why the Portuguese and the Spanish are so involved in it early on. And that idea that they were animals, so they weren't human, so therefore they weren't under God's protection, we're seeing that for the first time. And, that's not until the transatlantic slave trade. And so when you see history and when you hear people argue that Africans enslaved Africans, yes, they did. And Romans enslaved Romans. It had nothing to do with skin color. It had to do with being conquered and being used. And that's all it was. Now they changed the game.
Yeah, so the context of that was we were talking about common things that white racists say before we started the interview. And something we hear a lot is the Irish were enslaved too, and people have been enslaved throughout history. That's just part of history. Like, why is it? And so since Rob threw that in there really completely out of context, but it's an important point to raise. That was the context of it. So like, what's the difference between this or this? Well, no one had previously been enslaved based on skin color. It used to be based on a group you conquered, and then it was pretty normal thousands of years ago, or hundreds of years ago also, to enslave people whom you conquered. But it was based on political and military conquest, not based on the dehumanization of a specific race based on skin color. And I did not actually know that myself. So I'm glad you were treated to that, to point that out. And I just want to put it in context for anybody watching, because it would have been a rather bizarre thing to bring up at the end.
Yeah.
But people didn't realize that we were talking about that before the interview started. So, Rob,
Well, thank you.
Go ahead. You were going to say one more thing.
That's what I'm saying. As I realized it was out of context, but it's probably the most important thing I've said, because I truly believe that people don't understand the history of it and don't understand conquering them versus dehumanization is two different things completely.
And we still are battling with. It's the reason why if Rayshard Brooks gets shot to death while running away, we say, well, don't run away. Well, that's just not how we feel about those we value as an actual human being and citizen, because the police can't say they're in fear for their life when you're literally running away and you're shot in the back, killed. And it's like, well, we don't think that an extrajudicial, due process free death penalty makes sense for evading arrest for white people. Well, why do we feel that way for black people? And the reason, of course, is at a very deep foundational subconscious level is we fail to recognize they are people.
That's very true. And that's the first step to genocide is dehumanizing who's going to be targeted. And once they're less than 2/3, counted as 2/3, or Catholic Church saying that, they weren't under God's protection, or Hitler's calling them vermin, once you dehumanize them, it's easy to attack them.
It really is.
Sad, but true.
I really appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks, Pete. I know we went long.
This will go up on Thursday. I'm
all right.
Between a black friend, a white friend, a black friend, a white friend. I want the audience to hear from a wide variety of perspectives. So appreciate it.
Have you watched Emmanuel Acho's stuff?
Yes. He's the. I was talking about this with Adam Walsh, head coach of Shenandoah earlier. On toning, policing tone, right? And how it's only recently that I figured out that that black thought leaders can have any purpose they want. Purpose doesn't have to be persuading white people, and so they can speak in any tone they want, and
sure.
have any mission they want. And it's none of my fucking business, And the fact that that whether or not I think their tone might alienate a white person that I'm trying to persuade is not my fucking business, because it doesn't have to be their goal to persuade white people. And with that preface having been issued, Sam Acho is clearly, his goal is to persuade white people. And he is doing a very, very, very good job, including being...
Because he speaks well.
Because he speaks well, but he's being unbelievably empathetic and understanding when his white guests say ignorant ass shit, and again, because his mission is education and persuasion of white people, I think his approach is just magnificent. So yes, I have been watching some of his stuff.
I know him a little bit, and I'm absolutely, and that's exactly who he is. I mean, like, his persona carries over very much in TV. We played against St. Mark's a couple times, and he was on the team. And I hit him up for something, and he hit me back, And he goes, well, how do you know that? And I was just like, remember we had a 3 overtime game? And he goes, oh, yeah, yeah. And I said, yeah, do you remember the little kid that fouled you? And he goes, yeah. So that was my son. I was like, great job faking the foul, though, by the way. I said, I'm trying to figure out how the 5'7" white kid that weighed 110 pounds was taking down the soon-to-be linebacker for the Longhorns.
Well,
and he goes, hey, there might have been a little Oscar worthiness in there.
No, I often will stalk and harass prominent athletes I once competed against or coached against as well. So I'm glad that I'm not the only one doing that.
No, I give him grief. Hey, I'm going to ask you one thing before you go. Think about this, and I've been saying this a lot to people. It's not only a racial issue with the cops, because we are killing way too many white people as well, obviously. Just like our justice system, we incarcerate too fucking many people. In the state of Texas, it's 788 hours to become a police officer. It's 1,150 hours to become a barber.
Yeah, I know the training issue. I mean, I wrote a whole chapter on solutions, and I read something great the other day, and I can't remember. It sounded like something Noam Chomsky would have said, who now has put himself on the cancel culture chopping block, I might add, by signing that Harper's Weekly letter. I don't know if you saw it or not.
No.
It's a whole other can of worms, but it sounds like Chomsky, and I'm not sure, but I'm going to attribute it to him preliminarily. He said that we can't have class solidarity until we have racial justice first. And so, it's
a good Marxist statement.
You were absolutely right. Well, but Marxism was not really focused on class solidarity. Was Marxist, but
yeah,
justice is certainly not Marxist. At least not any of his writings I've ever read.
Not ethnically at that time.
But so it's totally true that police sometimes treat white people brutally as well. And it's true that there are too many white people in prison as well. It's just that and you're right that, because I actually studied for my book, looking at the poverty levels of inmates pre-incarceration. And Aristotle wrote 3 millennia ago that poverty is the parent of crime. And it was true then and it's true now.
Yeah, it always will be.
And I'm with Bernie that we need to do more to help poor people regardless. It's just that black people are disproportionately poor because we made them poor and kept them poor on purpose. And so first I want to do the right thing and provide black people specifically with equal opportunity under the law, as well as reparations for the wrongs we've done. And simultaneously, possibly, I absolutely favor broader, racially neutral anti-poverty programs. But you're not wrong that our criminal justice system is not only overly harsh to black people. It's just harsher to black people.
Yeah, and where I'm going with this is the guy that one of the players that played for me, like in AAU, his dad is in SWAT, or was in SWAT for a long time. He just recently retired. And I asked him about the Philando Castile thing when it happened, and I asked him Tamir Rice. And he said, he says it's fucking horrible police work. He said, so take the Tamir Rice thing. He said, they drove within 12 feet of him. If they thought he had a gun, they should have stopped 100 feet away, and announced themselves. So that's rule no, and you don't come out shooting with 2 seconds. He said the Philando Castile thing pissed him off, and he's black. And he said it fucking made him so angry because he says when he does a stop, do you know why cops touch your car?
No.
Leave fingerprints. When they pull you over, they touch your car. They leave fingerprints just in case, because it shows that they had evidence that they were there. So anyway, he says, I always touch the car first, And he said, I stand, and if you can imagine, where the beam is for the windows, I stand here, and I can look in the mirror and then I look in the car. He said, if you look at the cop with Orlando Castillo, we watched the video, and he goes, he's wrong here, here, and now when he's here, and he says, the guy, he's actually leaning in the car almost, and when he says that he has a weapon, he said at that point, he should have just taken 2 or 3 steps back and pivoted to that point where he's no longer a target. And he says, if you look at the Philando Castile thing, as we were looking at it, Castile could have easily brought the gun up and shot him. He said, this is a much more difficult shot. But the officer put himself in harm's way. Therefore, it's just bad police work. And then he said, on top of it, it's just murder anyway. But those 2 things I look at, and I'm like, I start to see it more when I'm watching these things as they pull people over, the mistakes those people are making. And, if we're going to make a barber take 1,150 hours to become a fucking barber, what the fuck? We can't make a cop do an equal amount of time? And I also think we've put too much on them.
I agree with that as well. The police chief of Dallas spoke on that several years ago. It's like we weren't trained to deal with a bipolar son menacing his mother. And so, when we show up and we don't know anything about bipolar behavior, all we see is a threat. We should not be in charge of providing any services whatsoever to the homeless. And it shouldn't be on us to do sweeps and, round up homeless people from encampments and throw them in jail for a night or 2 while.
Yeah, homelessness is not a crime.
Well, it certainly shouldn't be. But, and that's what a lot of the defund the police movement's calling for is reallocation of funds, not defunds. But, the American does a terrible job of branding. Holy shit.
Oh, that's absolutely, because every white person was like, Jesus, Tucker Carlson, they're going to take you. This is one of the comments that he made, and I love these slightly ambiguous but very threatening comments. It's like, they're going to take away your police, and you know what that means, don't you?
Right. Like there's a 400-year history of black on white violence. It's the other way around. Like all of you people keep talking about black on black crime and then imagining that black on white crime is also an issue. You can't be 88% black on black crime and 88% black on white crime. There's a little thing called math.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
We talk about Emmett Till. I make sure I show that photo in class. And on a couple of those days, I'm really very staunch about everything goes to the front. Everything's in your backpack. We're paying attention. That gets kids every time because he's their age, And
so I'm going to make a suggestion to you. The next time you do Emmett Till, show the Tamir Rice video in the same class to make sure they know.
Yeah, a tie.
This shit still happens. Show because you can find tons of clips of American politicians shitting all over John Carlos and Tommy Smith in '68.
Yeah.
A bunch of American politicians shitting all over. Same thing with articles and, talking heads on the media. So that may be an interesting project just because I think it's white people love to imagine that we fixed it in '65. And it's just not true. And so I think it's important to connect the past racist bullshit with the present racist bullshit. Like you connect Emmett Till to Tamir Rice.
Yeah.
And then it's like, whoa, you look at they didn't get lynched, thank God, but the Oregon basketball players got kicked out of school, no due process. This is why and I'm generally a supporter of the Me Too movement, and I did a long confessional series of It Was Me, right? I was the big time part of the problem. I hope less than.
You're not recording still, are you?
I am still recording. We haven't finished the interview yet.
Oh,
But so no stories.
black beans. That's all I'm telling you.
Thank you. So, but with my white female friends who were like, believe women, believe women, believe women, said no. Emmett Till, they believe women. Look what happened there, right? And there's so many examples of white women after having a consensual sexual encounter with a black man. Oftentimes, the white father finds out and becomes enraged and bullies the daughter into claiming rape. And that's happened in our nation's history thousands of times. So believe women? No, go fuck yourself. That's what got Emmett Till lynched. So, like, listen to women? Yes. Take women seriously? Yes. Don't victim blame when they come forward? Yes. And many other steps. The universally, unilaterally believe all women, I can tell you right now, especially if it's a white woman accusing a black man, fuck no, I don't universally believe that narrative, because I understand a little bit about American history and about our white supremacist structures and about how the police and juries tend to believe a white woman over a black man, no matter what the evidence says. But anyway, so how's that for a very illiberal conclusion? Me saying, fuck no, don't believe all women. So,
because you shouldn't believe everything that anybody says anyway. You take everything, and especially today, you have to filter it. You have to know what's right. Like, I ask the kids, like, y'all all know who Hillary Clinton is, and they're like, yeah, because they're not the most adept in politics at that age. They don't care.
of course not, right?
And I go, she worth a lot of money? And they're like, yeah. She's probably a millionaire, right? And they go, yeah. Somebody look it up real quick. And they'll look it up, it's telling me how much she's worth. And I go, but did you know that she was running a child sex trafficking ring out of a pizza parlor for extra cash? That's her side hustle. And they're like, why would she need to do that? My point exactly. And so I tell the kids, you can't do it. You can't just take people for, oh yeah, I'll say it. Prove it to me first. I do another thing with colonialism. So there's two things. Like Spain took out, and I can't remember the amount of money, but like billions of dollars of silver out of Peru. And I said, if I went to your house and I stole 95% of everything you had, how do you think the next 10 years are going to go for you? And they're like, oh, not well. Well, now we still multiple, Peru are they a first world country, third world country? And, they start to equate colonialism into how it affects you today, because I have to make that tie as a historian, right? That Vietnam wasn't just an American war, it was a colonial war prior. All these things. But one of the things we talk about, one of the exercises I used to do, I don't do it anymore. And not because it didn't work, but it was maybe my most effective lesson we ever did, is that I'd be in the middle of this and we had just talked about Rudyard Kipling.
How'd you quit doing it if it was effective? How'd you quit doing it if it was effective?
Because it's not appropriate for every class, and I haven't had a class in the last 2 years that I felt it was appropriate with.
Okay.
If the class is appropriate next year or whatever it happens, yeah, I'll use it. And so we talk about Rudyard Kipling, White Man's Burden, and we're right in the middle of it, and I'll just stop. And I'll go, hey, somebody just that feels comfortable, tell me if you're religious or not. If you don't want to raise your hand, you don't have to raise your hand. But who here feels like they're religious if you want to say it? And invariably, I get 2 or 3 kids, right? And so, unbeknownst to them, I just start tearing them apart. Well, tell me why your God's good. And of course, they got a lot of good things to say, but I'm older, more experienced, and I just cut each argument's legs out from underneath it. And, like invariably, my God's a loving God. And I go, really? Bone cancer in children? I don't know. And so they get mad and they're angry with me. A girl that I still talk to today, she's got to be 25, 26, got mad at me, and because I said, you need to change your religion because look how bad it is. And she's like, no, I'm not changing my religion. I said, you need to change it. And if you don't change it, I'm going to kill you. And she goes, what? She goes, I'm not going to change my, I said, I'll kill your sister. And I knew she had a sister. And she's like, well, fuck you then. And she stood up, and I go, her name's Destiny. I was like, Destiny, give me a hug. Let me explain it, because I don't preface it at all. I said, how mad are you at me? And you know that I love you and I've done things for you this year. Now, she goes, yeah, why are you doing this? So imagine in a whole country coming in and doing that to the people you know and love, and just destroying your ways of life, countering everything that you believe. That lesson sticks with those kids. I still get emails like, hey, I'm going to be in town. Or you wouldn't happen to be doing the colonial lesson, would you? Because other kids will want to come back and watch. And so the idea that, you think something like colonialism doesn't affect you, and then we tie it into, obviously how it's continued on to today. And man, that sticks with them. But that engaging that kid and making them feel that anger, because invariably the other kids that raise their hand are pissed off too, but then they know, afterwards they're like, yeah, well, I said, I wouldn't hurt you, so why would you? But you don't know these people are strangers that are coming in, the British, and I equate myself to being British and colonizing.
On the topic of the religion-based conflict is just if you look at the basic tenets of really every major religion, there's a lot of overlap in terms of what constitutes righteousness. And it's a shame that religion has been bastardized repeatedly to fit the narrative and the agenda of evil, selfish men. Almost always men.
Well, wouldn't Jesus be white, gun-toting, wearing a MAGA hat right now?
Aaron Smith is a JUCO coach at Panola. And he's a strong Christian. And I interviewed him, and he talked about, and I really got to go because one, I got to piss, and two, I'm starving. And I've had to piss for like an hour. But I enjoy talking to you. We don't do it enough.
Yeah, I know. That, to me, it's just conversation right now.
But Aaron did, he talked about how that when patriotism becomes an idol, that you're living non-virtuous,
right,
a non-virtuous Christian life. He said when things about our country are righteous based on Jesus's teachings, then patriotism's aligned with Christ-based faith and a Christ-centric life.
Like a false idols, patriotism would be a false idol.
But when the U.S. government is doing things that Jesus would most certainly not be okay with, and you're rocking with it anyway, then patriotism become an idol. So I thought that was fascinating. But I'm signing off. You got to go.
Hey, wait a minute. Do you remember Megyn Kelly telling everybody that Santa was white?
No.
Yeah, she said that Santa was white. She had, because apparently they made a book where Santa was black.
People getting worked up about that, like there can't be a black James Bond. What's next? What's next? Is there going to be a black Orphan Annie? Oh my God, there's a black Orphan Annie. It's like, what is
can't have that.
Like that shit is just like the people who get pissed off about conversations about racism, but not get pissed off about racism itself. Like we are, we've made progress, but God, we got a long fucking way to go still. So,
well, look up the Megyn Kelly thing where she says you can't have one.
No, I will not look that up. I will.
I show that clip, Pete. I swear to God, I show the clip, and the next scene or the next slide in the lecture is the actual Santa Claus that it's based on. He's Turkish, which means he's very dark-skinned and brown.
Yeah, I didn't even know the history. I do know that the idea that Jesus had light skin and blue eyes is preposterous.
Yeah, he's a 5-foot tiny Arab Jew.
Well, here's the thing: the Israelis who look more what we would consider white, came from Europe.
Yeah, it's from the diaspora.
Israelis who can tie their heritage back to that same region, right? Jews who stayed in the Holy Land from
Look like Arabs.
when it became the Holy Land till today, they look racially identical to Arabs. And so the idea that, again, a whole nother can of worms, but
yeah, Jim Jeffries says he's a tiny Arab Jew.
Yeah, I mean, probably he was all three of those things in terms of appearance.
Yeah.
But
Santa Claus is brown.
And I have no idea why that makes people. I do. It's because of racism, but it's absurd that, like, what difference does it make? Like, why is it important to you that Santa be white? Why is it important to you that Jesus be white?
Because of the children.
Right, exactly. Because we're spreading they're gonna hate their own race. I doubt it. White people are fine. We're gonna be fine. And my friend Dr. Crystal Seahorn schooled me to this, and it's not her original thought, I don't believe, but she's the one who taught it to me. And that is, to the people in power, equal opportunity will always feel like oppression. So white people are feeling very oppressed right now, and it's absurd.
It is,
but it is. I say this too, like, and again, this is speaking to white people who are interested in persuading other white people on this topic. Let's not recognize white fragility is real without factoring that into our attempts to persuade fellow white people.
I'm with you on that.
But
that's a good sign-off note.
All right, my friend. Love you, brother. Good to catch up.
Love you too. I'll talk to you later.
Later.